Hello, MCU fans. Today is going to be my breakdown and reaction to Loki Season 2, Episode 4, and oh my word, what an episode. What an insane ending. Obviously, there will be spoilers, many spoilers, so make sure you've seen the episode first, but assuming you have, let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget, we do have the October contest running. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and leave a comment. To celebrate hitting 10K subs on the channel, there will actually be 5 random winners announced this month on a video in early November. And you can choose, if you win, between one of the books or steel books above. Best of luck. All right, so a little bit of unfinished business. I think it's always important to try to frame an episode within the greater picture. So I want to talk about how I think Loki Season 2 ends. And in fact, Kate Herron said back in 2021, so I know it says spoilers ahead, but it's spoilers for the first season of Loki. She told us how ultimately it's all going to end. She says, in terms of the multiverse, as He Who Remains explains, he isolated their timeline. That's so important. He didn't destroy the rest of the multiverse. He isolated the sacred timeline. But now, because of what Sylvie's done, it's almost like it's going to branch, and those branches will be like bridges to other timelines where these other versions of He Who Remains will be. So that's why I've gone with this model. It's a working model. I keep updating it as we get more facts and as people leave great comments on the channel. But I do believe the multiverse is still out there. It's not destroyed. You know, He Who Remains didn't destroy it when he won the multiversal war. Instead, he used the loom, which is the blue dotted lines, to isolate his sacred timeline from the rest of these yahoos, the rest of the Kangs, and that's what's been happening. I do think ultimately the loom is going to be either destroyed or shut down, because I don't think the loom was meant to contain so many branches. When they stopped pruning them, I think it's going to be impossible to fix. It's going to be shut down, and that will expose the sacred timeline to the Kangs that have always been out there, that he just hid from, and now new branches, new timelines, will keep forming, and they'll act as almost like a bridge, thus exposing everyone to each other again. I think it's really interesting to look at a line from Homecoming, which of course, Far From Home. In Far From Home, of course, it was fake out, right? It wasn't really the multiverse yet. Mysterio was a sham. But what Peter says is interesting. He says, sorry, you're saying there's a multiverse? I thought that was theoretical. Then he says, this changes how we understand the initial singularity. So what he's describing there is the same thing the Collector described, which is that ultimately there was 6 singularities for the 6 stones, but that's what created the Big Bang. However, what Peter's saying is, wow, we're talking about an eternal inflation system. Now, if you're like me, you have no idea what that means, and I just ignored the line. But it actually becomes more important as we're trying to understand the greater multiverse. So if we look at the cosmological model of eternal inflation, we see that recent developments in cosmology radically change the conception of the universe, as well as the very notions of probable and possible. The model of eternal inflation implies that all macroscopic histories permitted by laws of physics are repeated an infinite number of times in the infinite multiverse. So the key there is the laws of physics for each universe can be different. That's why we get a cartoon universe, a paint universe, a noir universe, a cube universe. So, in contrast to the traditional cosmological models of a single finite universe, this worldview provides for the origin of an infinite number of complex systems by chance. And you can read on if you want. But the key there is each universe was separately created with its own Big Bang and its own physics. That's the universes. And then each universe has timelines, which is what we're seeing in Loki, the different timelines for 616 universe. So it's kind of wild that Far From Home actually laid out some of these theories. You know, the MCU looks at practical science and theories and then, of course, turns it into science fiction. I get that. But it's interesting how they're still basing it on, you know, real world theories. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Also, it's important to note that even the timeline book is establishing that the villains and the other Peters came from different universes. They were drawn into this universe. So I think they're also part of the multiverse. I originally thought they might be branches off the sacred timeline, but it's pretty clear now that they are other universes out there. Also, the timeline book does have some of the interesting lines from Loki Season 1 that apply perfectly. Notice, He Who Remains created the TVA to rein in these other versions of himself to prevent such devastating crossovers. He didn't want crossovers with the other Kangs. And most importantly, no more lies, He Who Remains tells them, you kill me, and the sacred timeline is completely exposed. Multiversal war. And then I think this is fascinating. If you look at Quantumania, this goes perfectly with what Kate Herron is saying. So the Kang from Quantumania, who got exiled by the council, he was actually trying to fix the problem. He says they were playing with time like children. He says, I saw their chaos, and notice he creates the circle of time, and he's surrounded by a circle. Around his waist there is one universe. This is a second universe, I believe. He's showing, here's two universes. I saw their chaos spreading across realities. Universes colliding. And notice, why are they colliding? Look at the streaks coming down. These are the timelines from each universe that are now starting to collide. Endless incursions. Notice the streaks continue down. So the universes were fine until the different branching timelines started building those bridges, which is what Kate Herron was talking about. I saw the multiverse and it was dying. And then this is, this great quote from Reed Richards, right? But think about it a little differently maybe than you have before. An incursion occurs when the boundary between two universes erodes. Why does the boundary erode? Because of the branching timelines forming the bridges. So Kate Herron's quote goes perfectly with what Reed is saying here, which makes sense because Michael Waldron wrote Multiverse of Madness, and of course he wrote Loki. So very cool. I think it all comes together. All right, second unfinished business. Let's talk theories. I thought this was so nice. Screen Crush, a huge, amazing channel. I've watched their videos for forever, reached out and asked me if I would like to go on their show and talk about these theories that I'm discussing about timelines and universes, etc., because they watched one of the videos. Well, I can tell you I would be terrible doing an interview because, as you can tell from these videos, right, it's all images. I love to throw out the images and have you be able to see the things I'm talking about. If it was just me sitting there talking to them, I would be terrible. So I politely turned them down and said, hey, you can use my theories. You have my 100% permission, and I'm really honored you would ask, but I would be terrible. I would be terrible. So I'm sure I'm going to regret not going on the show and trying to explain this stuff, but I'm telling you, I would be terrible. But I do want to do a call out for the channel. I'm sure you've all heard of them, right? They're huge, 1.5 million subs. But in case you haven't heard of them, go check them out. They're awesome. Ryan Airy, the host, does a fantastic job. And over on the far right, his dog is kind of a co-host. Amazing. And Colton Ogburn does a lot of the writing for the show and also appears. So, yeah, thank you, Screen Crush. You guys are amazing. And I hope a few more people go check you out. But I'm sure you're doing fine. 1.5 million subs. You're doing good. So thank you. Really complimented. All right, so let's look at this episode. So I'm going to go back to Season 1, Episode 6, where we jumped into one of the universes, in fact, the Sacred Timeline, I believe, and they show us all the timelines, right? And we wind around this corner, and we see all the timelines, how they're formed into the Sacred Timeline, and of course, there's the Citadel at the end of time. So this was Season 1, Episode 6. Then we jump to this most recent episode, where we once again go into the Sacred Timeline. Now the timelines look a little nastier, right? In fact, we're coming around the corner, but it doesn't really look like a corner because it's so nasty. I mean, you can't even tell this used to be a circle because it's all going crazy. Of course, there's the Citadel, which is completely falling apart. And then here we see we land in basically the same spot as we did in Season 1, Episode 6. But now, in fact, if we compare them side by side, yeah, it's not doing so well. Very, very different look at the end of time. But also, if we zoom in even more, you can see the gold inlays there trying to, heal things back together, to bring them back together again. In fact, we see them, in the Citadel itself. All the cracks are being sealed with the gold. Not very successfully, though. But this does kind of imply maybe this has happened multiple times, and they've had to seal it multiple times, I guess, because it's all in Ouroboros, as they've said. But anyway, we now get Miss Minutes dropping the bomb on Renslayer, saying, hey, he wasn't always alone. And so she scans part of the wall there and creates a cute little diorama, which then Ravonna gets to watch. And I love how they filmed this scene with Ravonna's face watching, well, Ravonna and He Who Remains. So we get some lines that we did not get earlier when Loki was listening to the tape. We get some context around everything. He says, so it's almost ready. A utopia at the end of time for us. So it should have been for both of them. Now, I will say, my view of utopia wouldn't be sitting in this castle at the end of time. So I do think the word utopia might be a bit much. But hey, if they think that's utopia, great. I hope that whatever the afterlife isn't sitting in a castle. But that's okay. They do, and that's good. Then they say, of course, the infamous "for all time, always," which is what we then start hearing on the tape that Loki listened to. Ravonna Renslayer, you're quite a marvel. I will be proud to lead with you. You made a difference in this war. Thank you for being on my team. I still wonder how this tape was cued to this exact moment. There have been some theories that maybe Ravonna listened to this tape and that's how she knew about it, but it might just be that it was completely random. Or it could be that Miss Minutes had it cued there in case anybody were to go here and learn about it. So who knows? It's just very interesting that we don't really know why it was at that exact point. But then we get the rest that Loki didn't listen to, which is Ravonna saying the TVA awaits our commands. Shall we go? And he says, I'll catch up. It's been a long road. See you soon. Wild, huh? See you soon. Where have we heard that before? Those were his last words before Sylvie killed him. So that's kind of interesting. Then we really find out what's going on. In comes Miss Minutes, the true villain of this series, I think. Hey, boss, fancy a game of chess? Remember, originally we learned he created Miss Minutes to play chess. And he says, no, not today. Pull up Protocol 42, a la Order 66. So we get that 42 number again. The answer to life, the universe, and everything from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And he says, erase all their memories, which is kind of what we assumed, right? That he just wiped them and went on. And then he says, I'm sorry. And we're actually going to see another character say, I'm sorry after doing something really bad. I guess that's the end-all, be-all when you do something terrible. As long as you say, I'm sorry, it makes it okay. But wow, yeah, now Ravonna knows everything. Miss Minutes says, you didn't just help, it was you who commanded the army, so she was a general. Renslayer says, well, what are you proposing? And she says that we don't need him, and maybe we never did. Wild. So yeah, Miss Minutes and Ravonna are definitely teamed up now as things move along. So how about Mr. Timely? Speaking of him, right, we don't need him anymore. Timely walks through the time door right in front of his statues. And you remember these were the statues that Loki exposed in season 1. So I don't know what they did with the head. Somebody's done something with the animatronic head. But nonetheless, Victor's learning all this stuff about the TVA. He's seeing the different wars that happened and all the history. And then in come the crew saying, hey, we need you. And Victor says, what do you want me to do? And they say, well, come with us and we'll show you. And this is why I love the lines in this series. What a great response. That didn't sound as reassuring as you hoped it would. Just so funny. I have really enjoyed Victor Timely's performance, a la Major's performance in this. Just brilliant. And then they say, hey, this is your loom, basically, and you're the only one who can help us fix it. So, yeah, we need you, buddy. We need your temporal aura, and we need it big time. So then we also see that, unfortunately, the aura might not be the only thing they need because OB has not quite figured out how to handle all those branches coming in. He needs something else. And we'll find out that something else is something Victor actually has come up with on his own. So let's talk about that. So they meet each other finally, and face to face. Ouroboros, wait, you wrote the TVA handbook. And of course he says, yeah, but I learned everything from a brilliant 19th century inventor named Victor Timely, and if he'd had the resources, he would have been even bigger than Einstein. So basically saying he was brilliant on his own, and if he had resources, who knows what he could have done. So OB is making it sound like he learned these things even before Victor Timely got the book. So hold on to that thought. But this is interesting. Because yes, Loki does say, so if your work is based on his work and his work is based on your work, exactly, which one came first? And of course, OB says it's like a snake eating his own tail, which, cue the meme, right? Oh, wait, you just said the word. That's Ouroboros. You said it. But I'm wondering, there's a lot of Ouroboros stuff in here. There's a lot of loops throughout this season. But is this one of them? So I want to throw something out. So we have the original kid that eventually becomes Victor Timely in the 19th century. And remember, they said it was the sacred timeline. So it's the way things were supposed to go. Well, in that case, he didn't have the book. So I'm thinking he must have been kind of like a Da Vinci, coming up with ideas that were, brilliant, but they were very unrefined because he just didn't have the technology, the ability to bring them to fruition. So I'm saying something had to happen in the sacred timeline without him having the book that led him to come up with ideas which ultimately inspired OB. Then we learn, of course, in this season that someone, well, Ravonna, not someone, Ravonna takes the book back in time to the sacred timeline, which creates a branch. And in that branch, Victor Timely then comes up with even better ideas. So his initial ideas before he had the book result in OB writing the book. The book is then given to Victor Timely, and he then improves upon them, which is what we're about to see here, that he actually solved a problem even OB couldn't solve. So I'm just throwing out that this one actually feels more linear than like a grandfather clause or a closed loop because of the branch. Now, had there not been a branch, had a branch not occurred, this would absolutely be a closed loop. But because of the branch, I don't know. Interesting. Let me know what you think in the comments. But this one feels more cause and effect linear than they made it sound, which is funny because they referred to it as being Ouroboros when I actually think it isn't. But anyway, nonetheless, OB then gives his best Doc Brown impression from Back to the Future. Speaking of all these different time travel things, they have done multiple nods to Back to the Future after calling it, of course, BS and Endgame. Very funny. Anyway, he says, here's a model I mocked up of the loom. Forgive the shoddy and slapdash work. It's not to scale, and I only got one coat of paint on there. And the reason I say that's a Doc Brown impression, because remember in Back to the Future, please excuse the crudity of the model. I didn't have time to build it to scale or to paint it, which is one of my favorite lines of the entire trilogy of the Back to the Future. But then OB even goes a step further and says, I haven't been able to carve out figures to represent all of us. But that's kind of funny, because the fact that he didn't create figures for everybody, we don't know who he thought should have gone in that suit, which actually that line is kind of foreshadowing a little bit of an argument coming up. Anyway, so whoever's in this suit, he says, is need to walk down to take our throughput multiplier down the gangway, load the throughput multiplier into the launcher, and where it will scale the loom's capacity to manage the backlog of branches. So basically, this catastrophe will be prevented once the loom has been upgraded, if you will. Then I love this. He says, and the branches were created when, and he pauses, someone killed He Who Remains and released all those branches and ruined my life. And that look on Sylvie's face is epic. Yeah, that was me. I am quite proud of it. But then he says there is much, much more temporal radiation through here. So Mobius is realizing, well, this is worse than when I did it last time. So, well then, that means Loki's really going to have to hoof it, right? These two are so much fun to see together. Because Loki's like, what? Says who? Why? Why is it suddenly me? Well, because this clearly isn't me, he says, holding up the figure. It's got your shape. It's got my shape. And then Sylvie has multiple times had to break up their arguments. She jumps in to say, it's a suit. It could be anybody. It's wearing a helmet. I love that. So funny. But so once they finally quit their bickering, we learn that really the solution isn't complete because Victor Timely is realizing the loom's temporal decay outpaces your multiplier's throughput capacities. So again, the book that Victor inspired OB to write, that was then delivered back to Victor, results in Victor improving upon OB's very work to then finally together they come up with a solution. Because, sure enough, he's got the same problem, he said, with his loom. And he holds up his device, his throughput multiplier, that will help solve it. Now, I'm still wondering if this is supposed to also ultimately be the multiversal core. I think we have to be careful. They're both circles, yes, but their functions are completely different. I mean, the multiversal core is not a throughput multiplier. So it's interesting, and I really thought that's what this was, but I'm not convinced anymore. I think they're separate things. Let me know in the comments if you think there's a tie between the multiversal core that we saw in Quantum Mania and his invention, but I don't think so. All right, so then a partnership forms. They shake hands. And Sylvie is not having any of this. She's very nervous about what's going on, about having those two off together. So she first kind of unleashes on poor Mobius. Once again, his sacred timeline life comes up. They keep bringing this up because I think it's going to be a key part of how Mobius' story ends. But anyway, she says, you found out you're a variant and you haven't even looked, have you? And then this is such a good point. She says, none of this matters to you. It doesn't matter if a few of the branches disappear because you've never bothered to look if one of those was yours. So basically saying to him, the only reason you're so calm and want to have pie, that's why she went off on him, by the way, because he wanted more pie. But the only reason you're so calm is you don't care. You have no attachment to the sacred timeline or the branches. Really, really insightful point. Fantastic writing in this series. So then Loki and Sylvie end up having a heart-to-heart, and I don't know if Mobius ever got his pie, because he kind of walked away sad. I don't want pie anymore. My stomach hurts. But anyway, Sylvie's revealing, yeah, I couldn't kill him, Victor Timely, because Timely looked so scared, and He Who Remains wasn't scared. And then she says, maybe he was, and I just didn't notice. That's pretty wild. So she's finally getting some insight that perhaps they both were scared, and she just didn't pick it up. Then Loki explains, annihilating is easy, raising things to the ground is easy, trying to fix what's broken, that's hard. That's a really good point. It's so much easier to tear things down. We hear so many people in life just saying everything's wrong and this is dumb and this is stupid, but it's so much better to try to fix things than just to tear them down. So in life, just kind of keep that in mind. Try to be positive, try to fix rather than tear down. And then this is cool. He says it's up to us to do better than He Who Remains. And then this line is so much more interesting in the actual episode than they portrayed it in the trailers. In the trailers, they made it sound like Loki was being arrogant. But here in the episode, when Sylvie says it sounds like whatever we do, we're playing God, well, Loki actually sighs and almost dejectedly says, we are gods. So it wasn't like, haha, we are gods. It was like, yeah, we have to take care of this because we are gods. In fact, even the framing, notice how he's really small when this line is said. Fascinating. So they really tricked us with that trailer, making us think that he was, bragging. He's the old Loki coming back. Nope. He's relenting to the fact that, yeah, I have to be the one to fix this. And that's why I do wonder if he will ultimately be the one in charge of preventing Kangs in the future, after Secret Wars and after it all resolves. Very interesting. All right, I love the fact that we get this judge back again, that she comes back in to drop a little bit of wisdom. She says regarding Dox, that Dox is a general of the TVA, and she wants to protect it at all costs. Give her a chance, basically, because your words changed me. That's pretty cool. She has a very small role in this episode, but that's some great wisdom. Never give up on somebody. Give them the chance, because you actually changed me. Of course, seeing her again did make me wonder, has anybody woke this dude up? Is he still sleeping? Somebody wake up Rip Van Winkle, please. This dude needs to be part of the action. Nope, he's taking a cat nap. Too funny. All right, so speaking of Dox, we now see that Dox and Brad are having it out a little bit here. And she says, well, it seemed like you gave up when you sold out our plan. I love Brad. He's like, I didn't know you knew that. So he's totally getting busted for deserting them for his life on the sacred timeline. But it shows how important that is to him. That's more important than the TVA, more important than everything. So Doc says, oh yeah, we know all about your escapades as an actor, Brad. So yeah, he says, I earned my life. He really feels like he has the right to go back and live that life. So in comes B-15 with her offer. Thanks to the judge, convincing her to give Dox a chance. She says, I know you all care about the TVA, and I know you want to protect it. If we have to fight to defend this place from Renslayer or worse, can we trust you? And I think this is interesting. She asks Dox, can we trust you? And Dox looks back at Brad like, well, can we trust you? And notice he's still got his arms, his hands up in that position, the same position he would have, in earlier episodes. But now he's holding onto his collar instead of his suit. Kind of wild. So anyway, yeah, can we trust Brad? That's the real question. And it's interesting because remember, in the first episode, they had such a, I guess I would say, mother-son relationship. I mean, they were so tight together. And now here they are not even trusting each other. It's very interesting. They didn't really develop this relationship very much. I wonder if there's some scenes that got cut. But still, even what we got, this is fascinating to see those two pictures side by side. All right, so after B-15 leaves, Renslayer shows up with her own offer. If we work together, we can stop her. So we see the two factions here, two different views of how we're going to solve this problem. And then Doc says, and you, this is really disappointing, I must say, to Miss Minutes. But of course, Miss Minutes comes back with a little, I'm working on myself. Just always got a little comeback line. She's the villain. That's the real villain right there. We see you, Miss Minutes. We see you. So Renslayer is saying, basically, anyone who joins me right here, follows me out that door, will have a life on the timeline if they want it. And I still want to understand, how are they able to do that? How did Brad go back to the sacred timeline. Maybe there's just some way that if you match temporal auras, because obviously he would with his real self in the sacred timeline, maybe you can somehow switch your aura into the body on the sacred timeline. I mean, it should have created a branch, theoretically, if he just showed up and killed the other Brad. So they must have some way of just undoing your Nexus event, if you will, or something. Anyway, it's interesting. I hope they explain it, because it's the type of stuff that I really want to know. But if nothing else, we just know it works, that they can send them back to the sacred timeline. And of course, she looks at Brad. You made a rather impressive life for yourself on that timeline. She knows she can at least get Brad to join. And Miss Minutes with her little devilish grin. And then this is interesting. Doc says, Bradley, look at me. I mean, is that something you hear your mom say, right? Your mom uses your full name. So I really do think there's something between these two. Even if it's not like Brad is actually her son, she treats him like her son. So very interesting. Yeah, she calls him Bradley. Look at me. Life on the timeline was that good? Obviously it was, because Brad's fine with this. And we see perhaps the most gruesome deaths in the MCU. I mean, yeah, I know entire timelines were wiped out, and that's pretty bad. I'm not talking about morally what's the worst. I'm talking about this is just gruesome. This box forms around them, and I love that Doc's in the face of it says, how does it feel to know that all of us here would rather die than follow you out that door? Good last line, but still, ugh, to think this box just crunched them. And Miss Minutes gleefully watching. Oh, my word. That's, we don't actually see them die, obviously, but hearing the bones crunching noises and seeing the looks of her being so happy, and Brad can't even look. Well, until he does do that one last look. It's like the train wreck. We have to do one look, and he does. I thought this was incredibly effective. We didn't need to see them die. Just seeing everyone's reaction to them dying was amazing. It told us everything. Meanwhile, we got Victor Timely, who's taken a little coffee break, a hot chocolate soup coffee break with D90, and offers some to D90. And I thought this was interesting. This is the first time I've ever seen him smile. He's actually happy. And the fact that he's happy right before he gets pruned is crazy. Crazy. That look on his face. Oh my gosh. He really, really did not enjoy this experience. And then again, look, there it is. I'm sorry. Really, really, Brad? That's how that works, right? You prune him and then you just say, I'm sorry. I guess it's all okay now because you said, I'm sorry. So then he looks at Timely and says, where's the device? So we now know that Brad is going to take Timely off to Ravonna and Miss Minutes, which we'll see in a second. But first, we get a view of the nasty hot chocolate soup. First of all, that's gross. But also, right after the scene of everybody getting crunched and munched into that drain in the floor in the prison scene, kind of reminds you maybe of a little bit of like blood. Like they're kind of saying, hey, this is blood, to remind you of what you just saw. So yeah, very, very effective, I thought, to put those two scenes right next to each other. And then notice you can see in the upper left, the pruning stick left by D90 when it pruned. Well, turns out Loki grabs that, and it might come in handy, right? We all know what he's going to do with that. So as I said, Brad has taken off Victor, who now realizes he's in the room with Ravonna and a very unhappy Miss Minutes. And then again, I just love the writing and how they handled Victor, because the fact that he goes immediately, well, thank God you're both okay. Like, he is such a huckster. He is so able to take control of a situation, or to try to. They're not buying it. But still, I love that. That's just such a cool character they created with him. So, Miss Minutes, besides having Victor in her control, also takes control of the systems. So we get the little access denied, which of course is a clear reference to Jurassic Park and Newman from Seinfeld, giving the little which always bugged me only because you can't do that to Sam Jackson. I mean, I know this is well before he became Nick Fury, but still, no one gets the upper hand on Sam Jackson, darn it. I refuse to believe that's Sam Jackson. It's somebody else that just looks like him. But anyway, nice little reference to Jurassic Park. And then we get OB thinking, well, maybe the reason she's able to do this, corrupting all the files, as he says, all the files are corrupted in real time. Maybe that's because Mobius downloaded unauthorized games again. What game did he download? But he says, no. I'm not going to make that mistake twice. So yeah, he admits it. He did. And of course, I think this is a clever callback to the dude playing Galaga in Avengers. Too funny. Remember Tony Stark saying, "Thought we wouldn't notice, but we did." So yeah, illegal games seems to be a real problem in the MCU. But yeah, regardless, while all this craziness is going on, the loom is failing. It is absolutely failing. Looks so nasty. And I think this is the point when Loki from episode 1 time slipped into the future. You remember this scene from the first episode. Well, the reason I think so is he had to appear in this room, the loom control room, when the shutter doors were still closed, which you can see they are, and when nobody was here, because they're all downstairs working on the solution and trying to get into Miss Minutes again, or into the computers, but Miss Minutes is messing with them. So anyway, I think this is when this happened from episode 1. Another reason I think is because Loki and Sylvie take off to go rescue Victor and notice the woman on the PA is saying TVA code 1127. I'd kind of like to think that's the same audio that we're hearing when Loki shows up in this room and sees Loom Critical. Notice she's saying the same thing. And it's always important to remember he doesn't have his jacket if he's time slipping from, episode 1, and he has his jacket if we're in episode 4. So that's kind of a nice, helpful thing. I'm glad he put the jacket on, because had he not, this would be impossible to follow. Anyway, then all the different characters are getting in place. Sylvie's stuck in the elevator, which we now know is because of Miss Minutes denying her access. There's Loki from episode 1, thinking there's still time, and then realizing soon after, no, it's now. It's go time. Because remember, when it turned green, that's when it was time for him to be pruned. If he wasn't pruned, well, he would be dead. He would be lost to time forever. So then we get the phone, remember, from episode 1 ringing. And so this all comes together, right? Then we also get that pruning stick, comes in handy, because there's our Loki from episode 4, realizing that's the Loki from episode 1, and that he's going to need to close this loop. And yes, much as I dislike closed loops, this is a closed loop for sure. Because obviously, if episode 4 Loki doesn't prune episode 1 Loki, then episode 1 Loki can't become episode 4 Loki. Ouch. That just hurt to say it. But nonetheless, I'm not a fan of closed loops, but I do like them when they're done in a clever fashion, and this one was really clever. So yeah, he realizes, I got to prune this dude if I'm going to become me. So, in fact, it would be interesting if Loki went, nah, I don't want to prune him. That's what would have happened. I don't even want to think about it, because luckily he did. So Sylvie comes out saying, there you are, thinking episode 1. Loki is actually episode 4 Loki, but nope. Episode 1 Loki is pruned by episode 4 Loki, who then says, I promise you this will make sense, which is funny because it's almost like the writers saying, see, I promised you it would make sense. Now it all comes together. So I kind of wondered if he wouldn't get pruned until episode 6, if that was going to be near the very end, but I'm glad they closed this loop now, considering the end of this episode, right? They needed to close all that down. So yeah, he says, I promise it'll make sense. And it is interesting. There's this article, this one being from just a couple days ago, maybe. I can't remember the exact date, but really recent, where head writer Eric Martin is talking about lots of things from episode 4. But one of them, the person questioning him says, now some people have noticed that it seems to contradict the time slipping, seems to contradict the time travel rules of Avengers Endgame. But is the past able to influence the future in real time just because, quote, time works differently in the TVA? Was that your get out of jail free card? And he says, yes, it's absolutely like that, and it shouldn't be. OB sees this time slipping, and it's like, hey, we don't actually have that. We don't age. This should not be something that can happen. And so there are different rules in the TVA itself, and we don't quite even understand what that means yet. So that's interesting. That means hopefully they are going to explain how all of this happens. That would be wonderful. But I think it's also interesting that he's saying these changes, the changes we saw in episode 1, where Loki went back in the past, those were influencing the future in real time, a la butterfly effect. So in other words, this time slipping resulted in the butterfly effect, where in the past, he says it's impossible to time slip. And then in the present, he suddenly goes, wait. A long time ago, he came to me complaining about time slipping, but he didn't remember that until it actually happened. So he rewrote the future. And again, in the past, he's like, oh, I can build a temporal aura extractor. And then in the future, he's like, no, I don't know how to do that. Oh, wait. No, there's one right down here. So time slipping is interesting. It can result in butterfly effect, which we saw in episode 1, or closed loop, which we saw in episode 4. And it really all depends on whether they're going into the past or into the future. So craziness. I'm enjoying this, but man, it does make your head hurt at times. So anyway, we finally find out who's on the phone, right? That was this big deal. It's a really tense moment as he reaches to pick it up, and it just turns out to be OB, which is fun. I love the fact that sometimes Marvel doesn't have some grand, reveal. In fact, it's almost a wink and a nod of, no, it's just OB, that's all. It wasn't anything special. That's fun. I appreciate that. Sometimes the reveals are massive, and sometimes they're just OB. Anyway, he's like, hey, what's taking you guys so long? Because Miss Minutes is sabotaging everything. Hurry up. And then he realizes, wait, I could take her offline if I reboot the system, but we'll lose the entire safety system. That's important. Like the dampeners that prevent people from using magic at the TVA. Now, of course, that's just exactly what Loki and Sylvie wanted to hear, and they scream in unison, turn it off. So we now get, I would say probably the only answer we're going to get is that somehow the TVA is just able to put in dampeners that, make magic not work. So that kind of explains that piece of season 1 where we never really knew that answer. But you also have to wonder, is the same dampener what made the Infinity Stones not work? I tend to think no. I mean, I don't know how they could make an Infinity Stone not work. I think it's just wherever the TVA is located, they don't work. You're not in the known universe. They're in some strange location, which they have yet to reveal. But I will throw out, it's possible that dampener was making the stones not work, and now they do. So, man, Loki's wishing he had pocketed some of those stones, right? Or maybe he did. We'll talk about that in the theory part for next episode. Anyway, very interesting. So, now Miss Minutes is realizing, wait, I'm being reset. Somebody's rebooting the system, so I can't access it. And this is really cool to see her just glitching all over the place. That's nasty looking. And she starts actually to sound like she's stuttering. I'm being locked out, which, again, with this clever writing, Victor says, well, mocking, that just isn't necessary. I like how they just stuck with the fact that, sure enough, his stuttering is part of his personality, and he's almost a little irritated that she's mocking him. But no, it's time for a Control-Alt-Delete because she is being completely reset. They're taking me offline. I'm losing my cognitive facilities. Some of these images of her look so weird. But she says, I need to tell you something, Victor. I need to tell you. She's just glitching in and out. That's pretty weird looking, that image. This one with the X's over her eyes, you think she's gone, but she summons up just enough willpower or energy or whatever she is. She's semi-intelligent, semi-alive to say, you'll never be him, referring, of course, to He Who Remains. And then, boom, she's out. I've had this screen before with the floppy disk, end of file, not good. Then the low-res, low-bit dollar signs to form TVA, and then the cheesy clock, right? Hi, I'm Miss Minutes, and the time, and then boom, she's gone for good. But it's interesting that she was framed right over He Who Remains' image and had said to Victor, you'll never be him. So you have to wonder, was this a moment which empowered him, as we'll soon see, to be the one to walk out on that platform? Did he feel like, no, I need to play the hero. I am the hero. Because so far, he's been drug around. If you rewatch his scenes from episode 3 and 4, just his scenes, he is drug everywhere. Everybody's pushing him around. Everybody's telling him who he is, who he isn't, who he's going to be, who he's not going to be. So did Miss Minutes actually change the trajectory of his life and embolden him to be the hero? Interesting. All right, so Brad is now easy prey since magic is back. And in fact, Sylvie enchants him. I love that. That looks so cool. And now that he's enchanted, time to go prune Renslayer. Boy, what comes around goes around, doesn't it, Renslayer? So we don't see her anymore, but we'll talk a little bit more about where she may be headed next. And then we find out finally, is this going to work? Is it truly He Who Remains temporal aura, or has this all been a big mistake? Nope, it worked. In fact, the computer even says, welcome, He Who Remains, which is kind of funny because if you remember in episode 6, he was joking like, oh, they still call me that? Well, yeah, they call you that because that was what you called yourself. It's just, remember, he's been up there eons and eons, so he might have thought, well, surely they changed my name by now. Nope, He Who Remains. That's who he is. And so this makes it clear. Victor Timely is absolutely a variant of He Who Remains. So, As I mentioned earlier, possibly that's what led him to feel like, wait, it's got to be me. I got to be the one that walks out there. So very, very interesting if maybe Miss Minutes changed the trajectory of his life. And as he walks out there, we get once again the view of the for all time always, which still continues to crack me up. Why would you put your branding logo outside on a platform where no one's ever supposed to be? Speaking of not supposed to be there, now I'm wondering if maybe this is the most gruesome death we've ever seen. I mean, literally, he gets spaghettified, and you can see like his rib cage. Ugh. Just as his skin is ripped off, as his innards all spaghettify. Yuck. Even down to his skull. You can see his skull there, his jawbone. And there again, as he's just shredded into nothingness. And then you do have to wonder, is that his temporal aura? The only thing left, and then it, of course, poofs away as well. Very interesting. So we'll see if that ends up leading somewhere, if his temporal aura was sucked out into time, or if he just simply vanished. Of course, this reminds us of the spaghettification in Ant-Man, right? Now we know how that variant felt. Nowhere near as gross as what we just saw poor Timely go through, but I'm sure just as painful. So now, what happens, right? I mean, Hunter B-15, what happened? And Loki's like, I don't know. You know, nobody knows. They don't know what is next. All we know is the loom is completely overloading. This is not good. This is not where you should be right now. This is not a good thing. And sure enough, we get this last look in Loki's eyes as he realizes, I think it's over. And it is. The fade to black was amazing. Oh my word. That was incredible. So let's talk about what I think happened versus what I think didn't happen. Because there's tons of theories. I have no idea any more than anybody else. Even the people that got screeners only got episodes 1 through 4. So none of us know. We're all in the dark. We're all in the dark. But I'm going to throw out, if we go back to the model that I've been talking about, obviously the dotted blue lines, which are the loom is destroyed. I think in the process then, because the loom was destroyed, the 616 universe was destroyed. So if nothing else happened, if this was the final episode, the MCU would be done. I think it's over. I mean, I guess you could argue maybe the Big Bang would happen again and they would cycle back through. I kind of think, though, it's just totally destroyed. There is no reincarnation. If that was it, we'd be done. But here's the key. These guys are still out there. I've heard people theorize, well, did this destroy the entire multiverse? I don't think so. It destroyed the loom and the 616 universe, but I think these guys are fine. Could be wrong. Because I've heard other people theorize, well, is this why we get the others? Is this explosion what creates then all the Kangs? Maybe Victor Timely's essence went out into the universe and created them. Again, could be. All very interesting theories, but I don't think so. We saw those quotes from Kate Herron that they were already there. They've been there this whole time, and the loom just protected the sacred timeline from the rest of the multiverse. So my opinion only, I think all that happened is 616 is gone and all the branches are gone. So how do we get out of this? Well, Sylvie has a time door, so she might have jumped out at the last second in the time door. Loki could have a time stone and reverse time, but I don't think either of those are the case. I think at this point we need to look at the remaining scenes from the trailers. And I want to throw out right now, for anybody that does not like to see trailers, because I know some people don't watch them, so they consider a trailer a spoiler. I don't consider it a spoiler per se because, you know, it's a publicly released trailer, but I get it. If you don't like trailers, this would be time to bow out. And I thank you for watching the video. Subscribe and you can get a chance to win those prizes. But for everybody still here, let's look at some of the trailer scenes we haven't seen yet. A big one is Loki is time slipping once again. So my big guess is that Loki's time slipping got reactivated somehow. Maybe they won't even explain it. Maybe they'll just say that's what happens when you are in the middle of an explosion of a loom. But nonetheless, we see him time slipping back here, doing the little dance with the inflatable dude. I love that. And he appears to be in front of a jet ski salesman, maybe even Mobius there in the background. So he time slips. We see him time slipping to different points in episode 4. But this is interesting. Notice he has his jacket. I don't think we've seen this. I don't think we've seen him looking through the book yet. And then notice he's walking in the door. So he might actually be time slipping multiple times to this scene. I think it's going to be crazy because then he looks up and his time slipping is gone. We see him time slipping to McDonald's. So maybe to Sylvie's branch. So I think that's part of what is going to be where we go from here is the MCU is gone. But because Loki time slipped back in time, he's going to try to fix it, come up with a different solution. Speaking of Sylvie, her branch, however she got here, maybe she used her portal door, right, to jump here to try to escape. Well, there's no escape because everything is going crazy. The universe is destroying around her. So if it, I'm just guessing, but if she used the time door to jump back to her branch, that's not going to work. And so, yeah, she's going to be gone. So she's not the solution, in other words. I don't think her using the time door to get out is going to be the solution. I think it's Loki time slipping. Although this is interesting. Somehow she ends up back at the Citadel at the end of time. Maybe she jumped to here. But again, I think this was destroyed. We'll see. Very, very interesting scene here where that all fits. Then we got Ravonna in the Void. We knew that was going to happen. And we'll see how she does when she comes face to face with Alioth. Will Alioth be her friend? Maybe, maybe. And then we see maybe some people's past lives. We perhaps saw Mobius's there at the jet ski sales. Here we see B-15. Looks like she's a nurse. And notice there's a portal door opening behind her. So that is interesting. Maybe Loki's going and collecting everyone back from the sacred timeline. I don't know. I think the sacred timeline's gone. I think, but Loki time slipped back, and now he's able to do some of this stuff. Then Casey, what is up with this? This scene threw me off from the first moment I saw it. Like, in his past life, was he a prisoner in jail? Is he escaping something? Interesting. But here's the real key. I think Loki gets a do-over to try to fix the loom. He says, what I'm about to tell you is going to be hard to believe again. So he's multiple times he's coming back to this scene to ask OB, what could we have done differently? So they're going to try to keep coming up with a solution to figure out what to do with the loom to keep it from exploding. This scene looks wild. He's on a microphone calling out to somebody. Is that now Victor Timely? Because I think Victor Timely is dead. But again, he's going back in time when Victor Timely would still be alive. This scene is interesting of looking out over the platform and the hose that's connected to people. It fell off the platform? Did someone fall off? And then Loki's walking on the platform. Like, what is going on? I love all these crazy scenes they're showing us to get us excited about what's coming. I mean, none of these have any context, but still, it gives us a lot to think about. Then we see this, where Loki is literally just watching everything disintegrate around him. And I think this might be the Loki that was looking at the book that we saw earlier. And then he would die if he stayed here, but he time slips again, which is nasty, as always. And then this is weird. At some point, I think he's going to go back and see himself from season 1, episode 1, where he's captured. But he's spaghettifying, so crazy. And then that's the real question, right? How do we stop this cycle? Because otherwise, it's all going to be destroyed. So my guess of where we go from here is that ultimately, they're going to find a way to shut down the loom peacefully. I think they're going to realize there is no way to fix it. The loom was never meant to capture so many branches and weave them in. There's a reason they were pruned. He Who Remains kept it down to a manageable level, and there is no solution. That's my guess. They're going to have to shut the loom off, and that's then where these guys come in. Because again, I think they've always been there. They were just sheltered, or the sacred timeline was sheltered, and now they're going to be able to wreak their revenge upon He Who Remains, because they feel like they're mad at him because he hid himself off. He's the exiled one that they discuss in Quantum Mania. He's the one they're mad at. So, reason I say all this is, remember, Loki season 1 and 2 are being put back to back before we get to the rest of the multiverse saga, before we get to What If, before we get to Multiverse of Madness. I think that there's a reason they did that, is because they're saying they both happen before we get to the rest of the saga. And then even in the timeline book, and I know there's a lot going on this page, but here's the real key. They're showing that Loki season 1, and I believe had the timeline book covered season 2, it would be right here as well. They happen from a cause and effect standpoint, I guess you could say, before WandaVision. And yes, I know it is so weird to think that something at the end of time then affects something back in time. It's science fiction, right? It's just the way it works. But the timeline book shows this line, this green timeline of Loki and the TVA ending right before we get to the rest of the multiverse saga. And again, I think both seasons are back to back. So there you go. Let me know what you think. Boy, this is some exciting stuff. I cannot wait to see where we go from here. So remember, October contest, all you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and leave a comment, and one of the 5 winners will be able to choose between the books and the steelbooks. And as always, we do have the Discord. So much conversation going on. I really love all the channels, but the metaphysics one is so trippy. So many different ideas, many of which are very different than the ones that I think, which is okay. I don't mind at all that people have very, very, very different views of things. So head into there if you want to see some wild ideas. But anyway, join the Discord. I will leave a pinned comment with a link to let you join. Love to have you. Also, don't forget, be a subscriber if not already. Like this video if you don't mind, and we can all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.